Yeah, it's one of the most famous sayings this week.
Yeah, let's take a deeper look at this.
This week, Parashat Kdoshim, we have many mitzvahs, many statements of how to live our life for the social layer of our lives, how to interact with people, many commandments regarding building a healthy society around us. And within those statements, within those mitzvahs, we have the very famous saying of ואהבת לרעך כמוך, which loosely translates to love your fellow as you love yourself. And the interesting thing about this mitzvah is in the psukim themselves that we'll get to later. But first, I want to start with the more famous statement by Rabbi Akiva that says, "Ze klal gadol b'Torah." This is a very big rule in the Torah. And what's interesting about this is that Rabbi Akiva chooses the word of klal, of rule. He doesn't say this is a big mitzvah or an important mitzvah, mitzvah chashuvah. He says klal gadol. So what I want to start with is understanding, what is Rabbi Akiva saying? Why is this a klal gadol? What does it mean that it is a klal gadol, a big rule in the Torah?
Well, actually, when thinking about Rabbi Akiva's statement, we can't not connect it to the famous story of Hillel when someone comes up to him and says, "Teach me the entire Torah on one foot." And instead of throwing him away, he says, "Okay, I will." And what does he say? He says, "What is hated by you, don't do to someone else." That's the whole Torah, and everything else you can learn on from there. Again, what is he saying? I mean, that's one important thing. That's a statement. That's another mitzvah. But how does that lead to the rest of Torah? And why is that all of Torah on one foot? And I think this connects to this same idea Rabbi Akiva is saying. ואהבת לרעך כמוך is not just another mitzvah. In a certain sense, there's something about this, which is a rule. And as a rule, it's something that through it I can get to other things, to everything else, maybe to all of the mitzvot. First of all, on the most basic level, yes, I can understand how ואהבת is key to all of the other social mitzvot. You know, we mentioned this about Lashon Hara in the name of Rav Sabato. There are many rules of you shouldn't do this and you should do that and you should say this you're allowed to say, this you're not allowed to say. How could I remember all these mitzvot? He says, it's very simple. If you truly love someone else, you'll figure all the rest out, because everything has to do with that. If you're caring for their good and this is something that's going to benefit them, then you'll do it. If it's not going to benefit them, then you won't. If you truly love someone else, you'll do what's good for them. You'll care for them. All the other mitzvot at the end of the day are connected to that. And as Chazal teach us that lira'cha is not only your fellow, is not only someone else. Lira'cha ein lira'cha ela HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Also HaKadosh Baruch Hu is your re'ah, is your friend, so-called. If you apply that same logic towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you love HaKadosh Baruch Hu truly, naturally you'll try to follow his ways. You know that this is what he wants. You know that this is what he doesn't want. That's the relationship between someone you love. What do? You try your best to do what they want, and you try your best to not do what they don't want. And this is what your life is around. So on the most basic level, this concept of ואהבת can drive everything else. But I think Rabbi Akiva is saying more than that. I think what Rabbi Akiva is saying, that there's a rule here, and the rule has to do with the unique word. It's not only ואהבת. We have ואהבת elsewhere. We have ואהבת את Hashem Elokecha. But what we have here unique is ואהבת לרעך כמוך. This concept of like yourself. And why is that so important? Because I think like yourself is not only just a way of saying how much. How much should I love someone else? I should love them as much as I love myself. It's more than that. It's saying that sometimes the mitzvot, and all of the mitzvot, whether it's the mitzvot towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu or towards other people, sometimes they seem endless, they seem distant. There's so many things. How do I know where to start? How can I do all of this? We know the famous psukim from Devarim where Moshe tells Am Yisrael, Lo b'shamayim hi v'lo me'ever layam, right? The Torah isn't in the sky. It isn't across the seas. What does he say? Beficha ubilvavcha la'asoto. You want to find Torah? You want to find everything? Look inwards. Ve'ahavta l'ra'acha kamocha is not only saying, okay, you want to love your brother, let's see how to do it. You should do it as much as you do yourself. It's saying the other way around, and we see this in what Hillel is saying. He says, look inwards. You don't understand what you need to do outwards? Start inwards. Start looking in yourself. You know yourself more than anything else. If you start from there, what do I want? What would be good for me? What do I not like? What do I like? From there, you can grow and expand to the people around you, and expand to the society around you, and expand to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Beficha ubilvavcha la'asoto. Maybe that's what ואהבת לרעך כמוך is, and that's why it's such an important rule. When I want to approach other things, distant things, and I don't know where to start and what to do and what should I do and what's right and what's wrong, and there's so many rules, the Torah says, Start inwards, look inside. And that's what Hillel says. He doesn't say, here, now you know everything. He says, ve'idach zil gmor. And from here you can continue and learn, and you can continue and grow. You have yourself. That's one thing that you do know. That's one thing that you're close to. Adam karov etzel atzmo. You know yourself. If you start from there, that's a rule. That's a way to grow and see others. Just like you love yourself, just like you know what you want and what you don't want, try to see that in others. Try to see that in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that will lead you to basically all of Torah.
Very good, very good. I really like this point that you're making about ואהבת לרעך כמוך, that it's about looking inwards into yourself. Again, there are many, many things we can talk about. These three words, ואהבת לרעך כמוך, each word is significant and has many, many deep levels. But let's look at the psukim like we like to do in these videos. And if we look at the psukim in Parshat Kdoshim, there's a lot of small paragraphs which you can identify them by the ending words of Ani Hashem. Every time there's a set of mitzvahs, the end with Ani Hashem, you know it's a paragraph for itself. And when you look at these set of psukim, it starts off with Lo tisna et achicha bilvavcha, ochach tochiach et amitecha. You shouldn't hate your brother in your heart. You should let it out and tell them what's wrong, what's bothering you, and try to make them improve their ways. Now, many times people understand this by saying, okay, you shouldn't hate your brother, you shouldn't hate your friends, you shouldn't hate people, therefore you should not hold things inside and let them know about the bad things they're doing, why they're bothering you. But really, it starts, first of all, like you were saying, with looking within. First of all, lo tisna et achicha bilvavcha. First of all, don't hate him in your heart. First of all, start with yourself before you run out and tell people what they're doing wrong in your eyes. First of all, start with yourself and try to figure out, why is that bothering you? Should that really bother you? Should that really affect your feeling towards that person? What that person is doing, is it really inherently bad that that person has to correct their ways? Or is it really something about yourself that's bothering you, and you should first look within and correct your own ways before you go talk to that person? Only after you do that internal inspection, the introspection, only then can you go and start talking to your friends about what they're doing and maybe trying to help them correct their ways. And when looking at the psukim themselves, it's very clear that there are different social circles over here in play in the psukim between achicha and amitecha, bnei amecha, and then re'echa, and the same thing with lo tisna, lo tikom, and in the end ve'ahavta. We don't have time to dive into all the meanings of this because there are many, many perushim, many classes to be taught about these psukim themselves. But we'll just point out the beautiful Maharal in Divrot Olam that explains the differences between the different social circles, between being an ach, being a brother, and being a friend, being a rea, where an ach is someone you're connected to on the most basic level, that you had nothing to do with that connection. That's an inherent connection, a connection that connects you, combines two people together from birth, and they have to do nothing about that connection in order to have the connection between them alive. And regardless of what those people do, they will always be brothers. That connection, that link between them will always exist, will always be there. And the opposite side of that is a rea, is somebody that a person connects to throughout their life, get closer to, and they're actively working on the connection, on the linking to that person in order to keep that relationship alive, the relationship they choose to have, that they voluntarily got into and want to have that relationship. And this really is a spectrum of relationships, the different relationships a person can have. And as always, with the sources we bring, with the Mekorot we bring, they appear at the description of the video on YouTube. You could look at the Maharal itself. It's a very important piece to go through and read. And you know, when looking at the Maharal itself, towards the end of it, it's interesting because he mentions the last few words of the pasuk that we usually ignore and don't quote, the Ani Hashem, ואהבת לרעך כמוך, Ani Hashem, which you kind of mentioned that point where you said that ואהבת לרעך כמוך can also mean loving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In order to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you first have to love yourself. But the Maharal says more than that. He says something even greater than that. He says, כי דבר זה שהוא אוהב את הבריות, הוא אהבת השם יתברך. This itself is loving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In order to really love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you have to have the love for the briot. You have to have the love for the people around you. And you have to work on that relationship. You have to work on that love towards the people around you because they go together. It's not only the Maharal, it's also the mission of us that says that anybody who's noach labriot, noach lamakom, that anybody that the people like, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu also like. It's a two-way connection. It's a two-way relationship because the idea is that once you understand that everything is created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu and everything has a purpose in this world and everything that happens in this world is for a reason, and you try to understand that and try to live by it, that's when you understand And that's when you can start to understand how to build better relationships with the people around you, the ones that you don't get along with, and then how to, yes, get along with them, and the ones that you already get along with, how to enhance that connection, how to enhance that relationship, because these two things are linked together. These two things are the same thing, as the Maharal says, Ki אהבת הבריות היא אהבת הבורא יתברך. Loving the people around you, loving your fellows is loving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and is an integral, important part of your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And also, the more interesting thing is that many times people quote, Amar Rabbi Akiva, ואהבת לרעך כמוך, זה כלל גדול בתורה, but there's another very famous story about Rabbi Akiva, probably the last story in his life about him, where he was sitting in prison and he was about to be taken out to death by the Romans. And Rabbi Akiva says, all my life I've been waiting for this point where I can actually fulfill the pasuk of ואהבת את השם אלוקיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. Meaning Rabbi Akiva, his entire life was waiting to get to that level of loving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Maybe really this is how you get to that level. You start off with זה כלל גדול בתורה ואהבת לרעך כמוך. This is maybe Rabbi Akiva's greatest teaching, connecting these two things together. כי אהבת הבריות היא אהבת הבורא יתברך, as the Maharal says, and why it's so important in today's day and age, social media and everything like we discussed so many times around us. Yes, there are people you don't get along with, but you have to learn how to, yes, get along with them. You have to learn how to overcome differences, because in the end of the day, it's either your brother, your colleague, your nation, your friends, doesn't matter. We are one big society that we have to live together, and living together as a healthy society is part of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. כי אהבת הבריות היא אהבת הבורא יתברך.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. When I love God's creation, when I love the people that God created, the world God created, then I truly love God. I can't love God and hate his creation and hate the world he created. Those two can't truly go together. But I think there's one last point here that's often overlooked. If we say that to love someone else, I have to look internally. I have to look what I like, what I don't like, what I love and what I don't love. And from there, expand to someone else. That means something very, very important. That if you don't love yourself, you're not going to be able to love someone else. And we see this in the world. Sometimes people think, yeah, towards myself, I can be hard on myself. I can be terrible towards myself as long as I treat other people well. It doesn't work like that. Someone who is hard on himself, who hates himself, who doesn't have that basic love for himself, doesn't even know how to love someone else, doesn't know how to really care for someone else, because one is linked to the other. Because the way I know how to treat someone else is when I know how to treat myself, when I'm able to recognize myself and able to recognize what I want and what I don't want, and respect myself and love myself. When I can look in the mirror and love myself, from there I can go on to love the world around me, and as you said, through that also to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It all starts inwards, and from there it can expand to the many circles around me.
Beautiful, beautiful, very true what you're saying. And you know, it's very fitting that this Shabbos, we're reading here in Exile Kdoshim, in between Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron, the week of Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron, the very meaningful week that we have here in Mitzvah. Next week, we'll talk a little bit more about Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, Bezrat Hashem. We'll just remind our viewers what we discussed last year in Parshat Kdoshim. We talked about what does it mean to be holy? What does it mean to sanctify yourself, your life? We'll link that video at the end of this one. Also, for the ones who are not in Eretz Yisrael this week, we'll be reading Parshat Achemot. We'll link last week's video with Parshat Achemot also, and Shkoyach Yitzi.
Shkoyach Tuvia, Shabbat Shalom.
Shkoyach to you, Shabbat Shalom, and Mitzvah Shem, שנזכה לבשורות טובות ולגאולה שלמה במהרה בימינו.
For more Talking Torah videos on different topics, check out our YouTube channel.